is how do you deal with this love and passion for weapons, you know, that are taught to children so, I mean, so small, and then how do you modify that so that they don't see it as part of their body?
Well, you know, I'm not actually so concerned about the question about love of weapons as much as I'm concerned about the way they build in to our youth this lack of empathy and concern for the people of the world. The idea that we can go anywhere and kill people. And I think what we have to do is we have to bring that home to the youth. You know what I mean? That your job in going into the military is to kill those people in the world and to kill them for profit and empire. You know, and the one thing I remember from about Vietnam and Puerto Rico is that there was a guy in the Vietnam Veterans Against the War. It was two brothers, and they both served in Vietnam, but one of them, Jose, I think was his name, in his unit in Vietnam, he was the Spanish translator for a unit of American soldiers, of Puerto Ricans who were drafted to fight in Vietnam and didn't even speak English. They were drafted from Puerto Rico, sent to Vietnam. He did the translating in his unit. And it made clear in a very profound way this thing about the Buffalo Soldiers. You know what I mean? The Buffalo Soldiers were the African-American ex-slaves who got into the military and were sent to go kill Native Americans to expand the West. And you know, that came up in a class, one of the last classes we did together. And it was really a way of, I think it reacted on the kids because they'd never heard this story about, you know, the Buffalo Soldiers. And I think that's what I think is important to people. It's part of humanizing the people of the world and exposing the crimes that this country commits and making that the challenge and not so much the question of weapons. I mean, you know, people get, anyway, that's just the way I would answer that.
Just real quick, I like that idea of bringing in, I don't know how we would go about doing this, but bringing in someone who chose not to serve, you know, around the same time that I chose to serve, and kind of showing these students that there are other opportunities. I like that idea. I don't know how to do it logistically, but because I always have a tough time answering the $1 million question, which is from these students, you know, well, what else do I do? I can't go to college. I can't get a job. You know, that's the trap, right? That's the trap that our system has put so many people into. So I like that idea, and I'll definitely talk to Stephanie.
Okay, before I'll call on the two.
Oh, just one really quick. Just when it comes to the moral injury question, just real quick. We do talk about moral injury, but one thing that Joe always brings up, which I think is a point worth raising, is that, you know, PTSD and moral injury, this is stuff that at least is out there for a lot of these kids already know that we're coming back fucked up to some, you know, in some way. But a lot of them don't know about the millions of people that we're killing and destroying abroad, you know? So I talk about that all the time. I talk about my own situation a lot. I mean, that's a big part of the Q&A. But, you know, the emphasis for me is getting these kids to think about what we're doing to these other, you know, these people that they never get to really see. That they're not coming into the school to talk to them. They're dead. So yeah, yeah.
The common theme is betrayal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Betrayal by your country.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, it certainly comes up, and it's certainly in every discussion. And a lot of it comes up when we show the film, and they actually hear themselves how the people are talking, and so it goes right into that. But in terms of getting into schools, there are teachers that we know and that are progressive teachers. There are teacher organizations. We try to get the word out through those ways to find teachers. We maintain relationships with the teachers that we're in and try to get through them to other teachers in other schools. Usually has to be approved by principals. Usually they do. Or in the case of what Barbara has done, has been actually just calling and going over and talking to principals and the heads of social studies departments and trying to get them to invite us, and then maintaining that relationship. So there are all different ways. Yes, you, and then there are people that want to speak again.
They can go first, yeah.
Okay.
Are there any other people doing it other than the three of you? There are other people doing it. And are they all veterans?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Now, how, if we came upon a school that would welcome you, how would we get in touch with you?
I will put the email address, the phone. It's actually on the leaflet there, but I'll write it up on the board, and just call us, email us, and we will get to your school. Yes.
Yeah, hi.
Behind Elsa, and then
Me? Okay, yeah, I'm Wendy. So my question is, coming from a place where you have like this very, very patriotic kind of union, and they always take out of every meeting they read the names of those members who are serving, and they say, let's support these members, these brothers and sisters who are serving our country and that stuff. And like, how do you respond to this kind of overbearing patriotism that equates serving our country with perpetuating violence in all these other countries?
That's a big question. You know, I think that I'm not sure how you do it in a union, you know what I mean, with a bunch of people that are all basically brainwashed and whipped up around this kind of thing. You know what I mean? I think that's a real heavy thing to be involved in something like that. And I think that if there are any inroads or people who are more conscious and thinking, you know what I mean? In other words, you begin small. I don't have a real good answer to that, because you know, if I'm in a situation and the flag comes up, I'll refuse to stand, you know what I mean, and salute the flag, and then spark a discussion and debate and anger among people. In other words, there's situations that come up where you might find a way to start a big debate. And you've got to, in that debate, you really have to have your facts and your understanding of what's true and what's not true together, you know, as best as you can, and then challenge people. And that's the best that I can say at the moment.
And I do think the language of betrayal actually is useful in that kind of context. You know, you do talk about, like, you know, we can have a high-level debate about whether patriotism itself is a good thing. But I personally do think that, you know, believing in something beyond yourself is a good thing, right? And what's happening, and what happens in all countries, but particularly ours, is that feeling is being abused. It's being redirected to vicious, ugly, inexcusable ends. So you have to recognize this genuine feeling that these people have, which I think is a genuinely good feeling, or a potentially good, potentially ethical feeling. And just make the point that this is not how we should be expressing our patriotism. We shouldn't be expressing our patriotism by killing strangers, mostly poor strangers, desperate strangers, thousands of miles away. We should be expressing our patriotism by building our schools, building our hospitals, so on and so forth.
Okay, I'm going to call on him, and then Elsa.
Question, actually,
What?
about how to get in touch. So.
Oh, okay. Elsa.
I was going to ask, since you mentioned Winter Soldier, and of course, I was happened to be at that, and made even a small film of this Winter Soldier in 2008. And I wondered if you ever use, some of that testimony. Anyway, I have a little film online you could easily have. We were soldiers of the war on terror, 23 minutes, just the testimony, a small excerpt. But there's others. I just wondered if you use that. And I remember I was there in the Vietnam War, and we were doing work also. I'm your age. And I remember, I don't think we've had it ever since the Vietnam War, the profound feeling of the black soldiers and others, and also of the young people like myself who were then got involved with the GI movement, with helping with the newspapers, whatever, that we really saw a sudden reverse of our view of history. It was suddenly, and of course we went in and we said, you guys are guilty, you have to stop doing this, you got to desert, you have to resist. Now people wouldn't even say that. They say, we have to support our troops, don't make them feel bad. They say, don't make people feel bad, don't tell them that you're really guilty if you go in the military, you're just, so, and it's so profound because I just even think where I live in Berlin, we have a Holocaust memorial right by the Brandenburg Gate. It's about the Jewish victims of the Holocaust. And what do we have for a Vietnam memorial? We only think of our military. We don't acknowledge the millions of Vietnamese that were killed. And this acceptance of guilt actually it's taken decades in Germany. It was not until after 2000 that they said that soldiers that deserted were rehabilitated, soldiers that deserted the Wehrmacht, and people were considered traitors who had been in the resistance well until the late 60s. But the whole culture has grown, although it is still endangered by militarism, by acceptance of this guilt. And everyone looking even in their own families at their own, this started in the 90s, their own, what did my father do? What did my grandfather do? What did he really do? And dealing with this. And it is an immunization against this cold-blooded thing. It has made Germany a very pacifist country. That even the New York Times always complained, because of their neurotic German guilt, they don't want to go along with the U.S., they don't want, and it's, we should call for the human value of guilt, of carrying guilt, acknowledging guilt, and asking that our whole culture do this. And just say this openly. It's not you're not like just a coward when you admit guilt. You're actually a stronger person. And this is what you guys are doing. You're going there and you're telling them about your own involvement. This is so strong. But the actual idea that carrying and acknowledging guilt is a cultural value we should start striving for in the United States. Because we are a whole culture suffering PTSD. We are a whole culture that that is getting sicker and sicker for not acknowledging its historic guilt, even as a child playing cowboys and Indians so easily, but going on and getting worse and worse with the video games, making it just a game. I think that's something to struggle for, but I don't know how we do it in the movement, But it's one of our values we need to fight for.
I'll make sure to get to this question, but with the guilt thing, I think one of the major reasons, one of the many reasons veterans have such a high suicide rate is they're bearing the burden of being the guilty ones.
Exactly, and not being able to carry it. Right?
Yeah. So I think it's one of the things that I do is I do want to, I mean. Ever since I've been back, when they say thank you for your service, on the plane or on the train or whatever, I always just want to say fuck you. I mean, that's what I'm feeling inside. And part of what I'm doing is it's my way of kind of saying fuck you, but in a productive way.
Yeah.
Like, so.
I'll give you good words for it because I use them.
Yeah.
Youthful misadventure.
Yeah.
No, actually, I tell people I'm not proud of it. I was part of a war crime and a crime against humanity. In other words, I do think you gotta, but, I'll say one thing about the PTSD thing. I was in the first rap group that started post-traumatic stress. In the Vietnam Veterans Against the War office in 1970, 71, we had Dr. Robert Lifton and Dr. Chaim Shatton, two people that became experts at it because they developed something they called the Post-Vietnam Syndrome. That's what they called it. That's what it was at first. And Post-Vietnam Syndrome said that what they learned from the rap sessions of talking to the vets is that the betrayal of ideals, the idea that they used our patriotism, our youth, and our sense of identity, our sense of wanting to be, have a life and contribute to the country and everything else. They used all of that to kill innocent people all over the globe. And that sense of betrayal is very deep. And in the Vietnam Veterans Against the War, we really took that, and that's why we were able to do the Winter Soldier investigation. And if you look at that, the question of guilt is all throughout it. The profound sense of anger and despair that these vets felt with the raping and the killing and the murdering and the butchering and the torturing, etc., like that. And it runs through all the testimony. But the other thing about the testimony is it was very organized how we did it. We knew that we had to go into it and try to indict the U.S. military for war crimes. So we made sure that the veterans were organized into panels with early years to later years, same unit. So if you were there in '65 and you were talking about the same language that we're using 4 years later. And so as we went through the testimony and put the guys up, the vets up in units, you got this sense of that this went on for every year that we were in Vietnam in one form or another, in every part of the country and in every military unit. That's why a system was at work, and it wasn't just aberration. It wasn't individuals running amok. And that's what the psychiatrists discovered about this profound sense of betrayal, because as one vet said in the hearings, he said, they've been preparing us for Vietnam since we were 10 years old, because I watched the cowboy and Indian movies, and this whole culture of killing other people. And what's hidden from people is this thing about empire. This thing about that the women who made our shirts in Bangladesh, the 1,300 women who died in that fire in Bangladesh, making our clothes for this empire, that pays them shit wages, that controls their countries. This global system of imperialism is what you're defending. And if you can't just throw words around imperialism in a high school class, you got to make it real. You got to bring it down to the ground, and you got to make the lives of the people come out. But the reason I'm raising this is because that sense of PTSD then was erased. It was erased starting in 1979, 1980, when the Washington Post held a series of seminars and editorials about how do we bring the veterans back to America. Some progressive vets contributed to that. And what we got was the monument, which is only American names on it. Yeah. We got the Rambo films, which is him throwing around Vietnamese left and right. What we got was the parades, and we got the MIA, MIA movement, which was a way of reversing, all of this was part of the reversing the verdicts. That's all our kids know today, is all of that stuff, and they don't know this other history. So we are going up against a lot, and I'm sorry for going on around this, but these questions are bringing up all these different things.
Okay, you will be next. I just wanted to show that we have Elsa's film here. We use this as a resource for teachers if they want to follow up. This is one of the suggested resources.
I'm glad.
Let me describe what this is. This is the...
it's the current.
Oh, it's the current version.
IVAW.
It's a current version.
I made this film.
I don't even have to share. I'm going to get
I filmed it at Winter Soldier. I've also shown it at the Vets for Peace in Madison when they had it. And it was always going to be put online because it is a really good tool because it's 23 minutes and it's just their testimony. It's not me editorializing or anything. And I have also here, but I didn't bring them, but I have them where I'm staying, with German subtitles, because we used this film, originally I made it, I'm living in Germany, to show them, we had an an Afghanistan veteran coming who had one of the few Afghan veterans who had spoken at Winter Soldier 2008, and to just explain to the Germans, because the attitude that they tend to have in the German peace movement over throughout a lot of the society. You enter the military, you don't talk to that person. That person is already a criminal. They have entered the military. And so to explain to them that we have this movement where people change their minds, you know, and for people to understand it better. So that's why we did it originally. But I think it is useful because it's short. So,
what she's talking about is the original Winter Soldier investigation was 1971.
Right.
In 2008, the Iraq Veterans Against the War held a series of hearings called Winter Soldier Iraq-Afghanistan. And that went on for 3 days in Washington, D.C., and that's what this is.
That's what it's about. Right?
That's what this is about.
Testimony from
And that testimony from the Iraq Veterans Against the War, those entire 3 days, is online.
It's also
People can go online and watch the veterans talk about the destruction of cities and peoples, and the siege of Fallujah, and all of, you know, I mean, a lot of the crimes that went on in Iraq and Afghanistan.
But the 3-day thing is good, but this is 23 minutes, so it's good for schools. That's the difference. Yeah.